Welcome to the Assureology Show, a growth hacker's guide to human capital management with your host, Mike Vannoy. Each week, we bring you experts in human resources, employment law, accounting, benefits planning, and more to build productive organizations. You'll gain practical guidance for your business. You'll be alerted to the latest news and mega trends that impact small and mid-sized companies. We'll give you the hands-on information you need to stay compliant with ever-changing employment laws, the strategies you need to win the war for talent, and much more, so you can focus on what you do best, growing your business. Enjoy the show.
Maximizing ChatGPT for HR, mitigating the risk but boosting productivity. Hi, I'm Mike Vannoy, VP Marketing at Asure, and this is a super cool topic for me personally. You're living under a rock if you hadn't heard of what ChatGPT was. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't have joined today's conversation. It is so powerful. I personally love it as a marketing guy and running a team. We use it. I love it. It's a great productivity tool. Highly recommend people to start using it if you haven't yet, and to explore how it can make you and your organization more productive. We'll talk about that in this discussion. But there's some real risks. There are some unknowns, but there are some known risks and things you just can't do or should or shouldn't rely, data you should or shouldn't rely on when it comes to ChatGPT. And we really want to unpack that information, especially from something so important as HR compliance. Laws are black and white. Sometimes the interpretation, documentation, support of those laws is a little more gray. This certainly falls into that area. But the laws themselves are black and white, and you don't get to choose which ones you follow. So great guest. If you watch the show regularly, you know Brian Shenker. He's an attorney at the Long Island, New York office of Jackson Lewis. Brian's practice focuses on representing employees and employers in a wide range of workplace matters, as well as preventative advice and counseling. Brian has extensive experience defending class and collective action lawsuits under federal and state wage and hour laws. He has successfully defended wage and hour audits conducted by the U.S. and New York State Departments of Labor. And Brian regularly handles cases before courts and administrative agencies involving claims of discrimination, sexual harassment, and retaliation. Welcome, Brian.
Thanks, Mike.
All right, so maybe we'll just start out a little bit broad. My experience when I talk to people, almost no one hasn't heard of it. But even those who say, yeah, they know it, and I'll start asking, well, tell me about how you've used it. And it seems to be that a huge number of people have dabbled. Some people have kind of backed off. They go, oh, yeah, you know what? It was really cool how it responded to me, but I ended up having to rewrite it, and that took more time than it would have saved. And so it's cool, but not for me. There's other people who have really, I'd say, kind of sort of perfected how to use it, and it has become a massive, massive productivity tool. But I guess maybe start from your perspective. We're going to talk all about HR today, but we got people listening to the show, watching the show, coming from all disciplines, all industries. What's your perspective in the practice of law? Where are law firms? Where are attorneys using? I think we're going to talk a lot about ChatGPT, but AI in general.
Yep. So yeah, I think that it's one of those things that you don't want to be scared of. You want to say cautiously adopt its use. Now, in the legal profession, we have some requirements like attorney-client privilege that can drastically reduce or limit what we can do with a program like ChatGPT. Given that putting client information or privilege information in there can cause issues, as we'll address more broadly. But to the extent it's not protected, I mean, we can analyze data that public data that's out there that might be relevant to a case. It's very valuable in that, right? It can save dozens, if not hundreds of hours of labor in analyzing and I won't say just simple data. I think it's able to analyze more complex data as well that can take a long time. So I think that's one way. I mean, look, in terms of sending a simple email or scheduling, things like that, it can be absolutely helpful with just as we'll discuss, understanding what it can and can't do, which to some extent is something you have to use it and learn what it can do and how it can refine answers. So there are lots of uses, and I don't think the legal industry has gotten to that point where we've figured out all the uses yet, or come to that point.
Yeah, and I can just say, give some examples. In sales and marketing, a lot of people are great salespeople, but they maybe struggle writing that email. Even hate to say, a lot of people struggle with basic spelling, grammar, and whatnot. Or maybe they're good, but they're slow. And so for basic communications, man, it's awesome. And if you haven't tried it, you should. So put in a prompt, and we'll talk a lot about prompts. It's really how to use it in the instructions you give it. Think of a conversation happening. It's the questions you would ask in a conversation, as though you are interviewing ChatGPT as a person. And if you say, write me a thank you letter, follow up to our meeting, the things we talked about were A, B, and C, boom, within seconds, way faster than you could ever type, you're probably going to have a really great thank you letter. Now, will that letter understand the nuances of that person's business? Will they understand the body language that you shared during the call or that meeting? Or maybe the eye contact you had or didn't have during that meeting? Of course not, right? So nor is it possible. But if you're a marketer and you want to write Google ad copy, you want to write 168 or whatever characters for a tweet, you want a short blog post, you want an email communication, then man, great tool. I will for sure say, as a marketer, it still requires oversight. I've used it for things like press releases. I put in asked ChatGPT to create a press release about some upcoming trade shows we were participating in. I gave it the names of those trade shows and said this year, and it gave me back incorrect dates and locations. So understand that it is really, really fast at replicating kind of what humans can do, and humans can get locations and dates wrong too, right? It's still, if I wasn't, dare I say, the expert in knowing exactly what the topic was, what locations, what dates we were going to be exhibiting at these trade shows, I could have just hit the publish button and look like an idiot, right? And so I think that's where I would guide folks. Use it to speed up and improve the work you do, but it has not replaced humans yet. It is not always 100% accurate, right? One of the areas that I want to explore with you, and I think I'll go there now just because we're going to focus more HR, but it maybe involves copyright. I know one of the areas of use is engineers, right? So you could, as an engineer, you could literally say, ChatGPT, give me the lines of code that allows a service to do this, and it'll spit back that code. So I don't have to code anymore. ChatGPT gives me the code. I can say personally, I was trying to do some sophisticated stuff recently in Excel. I was doing some VLOOKUP, had a combination of VLOOKUP and rounding rules, and a concept called jittering, where you're messing with data all in one big, really complex formula. I Googled it, spent 10 minutes trying to understand how to use this combination of formulas. I'm like, what the heck? I stuck it in ChatGPT, give me the formula that does this. And it gave me this big article that I didn't read because I could just see the formula. I just copy pasted the formula. Now, that formula is a formula from Excel. I have no copyright issues. But if I'm an engineer building a software product that I'm going to either use to run my business, or I'm going to sell this software and generate revenue off it and could be the foundation of my business, I don't know where that source code actually came from, right? Because it's coming from the knowledge base of ChatGPT. before we jump into HR stuff, where might an engineering function get an entire company in trouble using ChatGPT for generating code?
Right, exactly. So I think you pinpointed one of the potential issues with ChatGPT, which, there's one issue with the information we put in. We'll get to that later. But what we're talking about now is the information you get out, right? For instance, in your example of source code, that's now going into, proprietary code for the company that, they're claiming to have developed, or it's going to go into, something else that might be copyrighted by the company. And so, I think what the issue we have is that, the information coming from ChatGPT is developed from its review of millions of websites, as well as its constant learning from other information inputted by users. So you don't know where the information is coming from, which, raises, serious, copyright, issues, right? Depending on ChatGPT's involvement, a newly developed code that might have been run through ChatGPT, it might not be eligible for copyright protections because, as the Copyright Act applies, right now it's defined that an author, it's works created by an author under copyright law, and the author, till now, needs to be a human being. So, these things that come out of it, if it's found that, ChatGPT, substantially contributed to something that you're seeking copyright protection for, there might not be those protections. So, we need to make sure you're aware of that. I believe, ChatGPT has a term in their terms of use that basically says that that while the user owns all input, that OpenAI, the firm that created ChatGPT, that they own the output, but that they assign it to you. They assign, their interest in the output. So it's not definitive that ChatGPT or OpenAI have rights in that outputted information, but definitely something that companies should look into and consider if they're going to be using the ChatGPT output for things they'll seek those types of copyright or trademark protections.
So folks watching, there's endless YouTube videos on what ChatGPT is and how it gets its data. We won't go deep on that, but just know it's hundreds of millions of data points, and it's really what's called an LLM, a large language model, where it might not seem possible, but quite literally what ChatGPT is doing is predicting the next word to say. And so based on all of the words that it's picked up across the internet, hundreds of millions of data points, based on what you ask it or tell it to do, it's going to predict, okay, based on all of these, hundreds of millions of data points, this is what I think the best answer probably looks like. It does not mean that it's right. So what's tricky here, and especially when it comes to HR, is it's like when you're talking to a person and they're going and I, and they're not making eye contact with you, and they give you the answer. I'm pretty sure it would be this, or it's probably that. You're not going to have a lot of confidence in their answer, right? But ChatGPT is going to look you in the eye and shoulders back, right? Chest out, look you in the eye and give you a straight answer. And it's going to sound and come off sounding very authoritative, even if it's flat wrong, right? So just understand, all it's really doing is predicting the next word. It's really, really, really good at that. But that's what the model is. Let's maybe as a jumping off point into HR, Brian. It was just last week the EEOC actually came out with a formal statement and a formal position on AI in the use of HR. Why don't you unpack what that notice was from the EEOC?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, the EEOC obviously recognizing that AI and, things like chatbots like ChatGPT are being used more and more, went out and actually started addressing it. And really, what the EOC guidance addresses is the potential for discrimination with various types of AI in the workplace. And their real focus is on disparate impact, which, disparate impact, as we'll recall, is when you have an otherwise neutral policy that ends up having in practice a disparate negative result on people of certain protected categories like race or sex or disability. And so what the EOC recognizes is that using these various types of AI, whether it's screening tools for applicants, that these can have negative impacts in the recruitment, hiring, promotion, and firing stages of employment. So that's what their guidance really addresses. And what a few of the things that the EEOC says is that pretty much they tell employers it's on you. Basically, that even if you're using a third-party vendor's software and they're implementing it, that if there is a disparate impact, a discriminatory effect from these AI tools, that the employer will be responsible. They'll be held responsible for the actions of their agents, in this case, the third-party vendor. And so what the EOC suggests essentially is that companies conduct bias audits. They don't explicitly, I think, use that term, but that's essentially what they're getting at, is that number one, you should, if you're going to use any AI software, the EOC recommends asking that vendor, have you conducted an analysis, and what was involved in that analysis, and what were the results? Because a lot of these AI tools, ChatGPT included, they might have implicit bias, which is not part of the necessarily, intended as part of the code or anything else, but that, for instance, if ChatGPT is reviewing millions of websites and many of those websites have, what could be, sexist material or various things, that will then be reflected in the output. Or, in the case of a screening AI tool for applicants, right? Maybe that screening AI tool has been trained on predominantly male resumes. So it's familiar with male resumes. And then it sees, women's resumes, which may often have a gap in work for childbirth.
That's right.
And, it might grade those lower because it's looking at a male resume as it's typical as the goal. So I think those are the things that, the EOC points out, and that, one of the things they talk about is the 4/5 rule, which is not applied across the board by courts. But basically what the 4/5 rule says is that, if any rate of, let's say, acceptance of applicants is, more or less than, 80% of the ratio we'd expect to see, 4/5, then that's an indication that the AI tool or whatever, practice we're talking about has a disparate impact and should be, looked into. So really,
this whole concept of disparate impact, I mean, if you didn't watch our show, I think it was just 2 weeks ago, a couple weeks ago we did, and we talked a lot on this topic around Title VII. I think for the most part, employers are aware of just you can't discriminate based on race, gender, et cetera, right? But even if you're not intending to, and you're unconscious and maybe in fact you're technically not by the policy in itself, this disparate impact is if the result, the impact of your policies is having a disparate impact, then you're still just as liable for discrimination under Title VII as if you did intend to. And I kind of come back to why I kind of wanted to define large language model, 400-ish million data points that ChatGPT sits on. If you ask it to say, okay, give me a list of interview questions, it's going to give you a really cool document that is going to give you a list of interview questions. But if those interview questions include things like explain why you had gaps in your resume, then you might go under unintended waters where you could be discriminating, just like you said, against women who maybe had a leave of absence to raise their children, right? Could have been multi-year, or maybe you're getting really sophisticated and you're not using it to just write interview questions. You're using it to actually screen candidates before they get to the interview process. Your software, your process is having a disparate impact, discriminating against folks, even if you didn't mean to. And because the large language model, ChatGPT, is sitting on top of this massive set of data, if there is implicit bias in that massive data set, all it's going to do is keep repeating that. And ironically, if you ask ChatGPT to write you an article on interviewing and screening talent, and then you publish that as part of the blog that ChatGPT later scans and that becomes part of its knowledge base, theoretically, it's a positive feedback loops that these biases get deeper entrenched into the platforms. So go ahead, Brian, you were going to say something.
Yeah. And I think, it's not all negative, because I think to some extent too that, ChatGPT and other AI tools, in the hiring process, for instance, might help us avoid, a hiring manager's maybe unconscious bias, right? So it can be valuable, but I think the overarching theme is that it needs human oversight, right? We can't just blindly say, we can't be found to have discriminated against anyone because we're using AI tools. And so it's just important to understand that those AI tools could have biases, could result in your company having an unintended bias against certain protected classes. So it's important to either conduct a self audit or make sure that a bias audit has been conducted by the vendor as to this AI, and so that you can be confident that by using it, you're not perpetuating some internal algorithm that may result in bias.
True story. 2 years ago, I'm driving at night through Central Texas with my family. I got pulled over. I was going, call it 72 miles an hour. Policeman pulled me over and said that, hey, you're speeding. Do you know what the speed limit is? And I'm like, yeah, 70. Google Maps on directions on my screen said the speed limit was 70. He said, no, sir, the speed limit here is 60. He saw it. He was a nice guy. He let me off. 200 yards up the road, when I pull away, I see the sign, 60 miles an hour. The machine was wrong, right? And the officer made it clear that he gave me a pass, but it was my responsibility to follow the laws regardless of what the machine said. I think that perfectly applies here. Now, the machine was wrong about the speed limit. I'm an old guy. I need glasses. I could have read a sign wrong. I could still be wrong. So it's the way to think about this is the machine will help you be faster and more productive, but will have the ability to make errors just like you and I do, right?
Absolutely. So, yeah. Right. And I think that's the key, that use of it, right? You don't just, rely on it, and we'll get into, the various uses and HR policies, but, making sure that your employees understand that when they're using it, right? For instance, the example you gave before, right? An email with certain information about an event that, it'll spit something back to you that looks really good, is well written, and, natural. But, in the case of ChatGPT, it's a starting point, right? I think one good way to look at it is, ChatGPT can give me that great draft, but then it's on me to make sure it's accurate and it's
That's
what
right.
we need.
It's exactly right.
Right.
I haven't stopped using Google Maps, right? But it doesn't remove my responsibility from also at least glancing at street signs, paying attention to the traffic in my surroundings, right? So I think the same applies here. Use it to make you faster, right? But you still have to know the law, and ultimately you're going to be accountable for following the law. Okay, let's talk a little bit about data privacy. So if I ask ChatGPT to write a performance improvement plan, a PIP, because I'm really concerned about this Brian guy working for me. He's slacking, and I'm gonna put him on a performance plan. So I tell ChatGPT, write a letter to Brian Shenker. He's been doing such and such, and here's the consequences if he doesn't shape up. How thin of ice am I going out on what happens to that data that I'm giving the machine?
Right. So I think one of the points you made earlier about how ChatGPT gets its knowledge, right? It both has, they've scoured the internet and maybe even offline materials, but on an ongoing basis, ChatGPT is learning. Basically, information that goes into ChatGPT, right? The questions or information that any user provides while it might not be retained by ChatGPT, ChatGPT is using that information to learn, and how it's learning how to respond to similar inquiries. So when you're a user and you're entering information in ChatGPT, there are no guarantees of security, right? That it's possible that portions of the inputted information can be provided in some form to a future user. And ChatGPT actually states in their terms, right, that to help OpenAI provide and maintain the service, that you agree and instruct that we may use content to develop and improve the services. Now, I believe there's an opt-out procedure. I'm not incredibly familiar with that, but that's something companies can look into. But certainly, one of the big issues is the privacy and protections of information put into ChatGPT. So, for example, a company has a trade secret, right? Let's say it's code. It's code for some program. And coding is one of the things that ChatGPT has actually been very helpful with. And you're trying to figure out, there's some mistake, there's some error in the code, and so it gets entered into ChatGPT. Now, that is a trade secret, which under typical trade secret law, companies need to take steps to maintain the confidentiality of their trade secrets. So, by entering the code into ChatGPT and then using whatever came out of that, has the company now waived its right to call this code, call this software a trade secret? So I think that, just as we spoke earlier about issues, copyright issues for the output, the information that ChatGPT gives you, putting information in there, right? Whether it's that source code, it could be employee information, right? Names, addresses. It could be client information. It could be, protected health information for some employers. That employees need to understand what the limitations are in terms of putting that in, because not to mention, look, there's always there's the issue of what ChatGPT might use it for, but there's also just the general concern of we've sent something through the wires to the internet, right? And would you typically send a trade secret out like that, or would you typically send it in a secure email message service? So that's something, and again, there's no one size fits all type solution for this, because the type of information that any company is going to be using ChatGPT might differ, right? So there might not be much concern for drafting, marketing emails or marketing materials, but, a company using it to help, write code or research, data point. There might be issues there in terms of what should really be put into the chat.
And I think there's two sides of that coin, right? There's certainly the, hey, I don't want to, everything I ask or tell the machine to do, I have just fed that into its learning model. So I could be giving away private data, potentially PII, personally identifiable information. If I'm giving away information, and I'm probably not going to be so stupid as to stick Social Security numbers of employees. But if I'm talking about, hey, write a letter write a letter to an employee wishing them well as they recover from heart surgery, and I include their name, have I just told the internet? Have I just fed some massive machine that John Doe, who works for me, is 63 years old and is just recovering from heart surgery and could now become part of some biased knowledge base when he applies to some other job? The answer is you don't know. So here's the other side of that coin. The bot also does not know what it hasn't been fed. And so if you have company policies, if you have an employee handbook, sure hope you do, we'll help you if you don't, it's not going to understand that to use that as context when creating documentation or performing analysis either. What more could you say about that, Brian?
Right. So that's where I think, the accuracy and reliance on ChatGPT, it's, there's always a risk that the user or the worker will rely on, the wrong information. So I think number one, I know, we've discussed, using ChatGPT and that, it has the ability to, if you follow up with questions and, clarifications, there's a way that you can provide ChatGPT with appropriate context, where you get something that ends up being more accurate. But I think, ideally, like we said before, someone's going to rely on this as a first draft. So I think, one of the items we discussed in terms of accuracy is, whether it's up to date. And while it's always learning, that I believe the information in ChatGPT, as OpenAI tells us, is only good through September 2021, right? So if you're seeking, accurate information about something that happened since then, it may or may not have that information. And if it does, it may be through, learning from users, and you need to question, whether it's actually accurate. And, even, ChatGPT, and OpenAI, they recognize that it may sometimes write completely plausible sounding responses that are either incorrect or nonsensical. But, so you can't just, blindly rely on it. It's really only as good as the data set it's learned from. So let me say this. I don't want to completely trash it. So I absolutely agree with the EEOC's position. You cannot rely on it for compliance. It does not replace expertise. And regardless of whether you do or don't choose to rely on it, you will be held accountable for your policies, regardless if you're using AI or not. So agree with all that. It's also pretty darn good. And you were just hinting at it. It will sound good. I tried stumping it. So like in our blog post on Friday, 2 weeks ago, we always share like local and state law and federal law updates. And there was an update in Arkansas, effective July 6, 2023. Arkansas amended its Civil Rights Act to specify, and had to do with hairstyles. So like at the federal level, there's the Crown Act, right? It has to do with hairstyles and how that leads to discrimination against people of color in different ethnicities that wear traditional hairstyles. In Arkansas, consistent with everything else that's happening now, they passed their own state versions of these, right? That are more fractured. So I just popped in the question in ChatGPT. Can I fire an employee in Arkansas for an inappropriate hairstyle?
because in my mind, it's just an inappropriate hairstyle. Can I fire him for that? And it was smart enough to say, hey, I'm not a lawyer. It gives me the acknowledgement. My knowledge goes up through September of 2021. But then it does go on to say, well, Arkansas is an at-will state, and so you can kind of do what you want. And then it kind of reverses itself a little bit. However, around hairstyles, there's a little bit of nuance. It doesn't give me the specific legal answer, can I or can't I? So was it okay to use? I think if you weren't really familiar with the law in, the Crown Act, and if you hadn't read the updated statutes for Arkansas going in place July 6th, then it's a really educational article. And as a business owner, maybe I own and manage a golf course. This is probably completely new information to me. And that's actually really interesting. That's probably important context. I still don't know the law, what I can and can't do, right? So again, use it as a productivity tool, use it as a knowledge gathering tool, get better, get smarter. Don't allow it to be the final rule. I wanted to explore, there's developments when it comes to unions, Brian. So I know not everybody listening works for or runs a union shop, but you and I've talked about this before. We've done shows on this. Clearly, support for unions is growing. The shift of power over the past 2 decades is accelerating from employer to employee. That includes support for unions. The Writers Guild is on strike right now, basically saying, "Hey, we don't want this to replace us." How should employers be thinking about this from a legal standpoint?
Right. So, yeah, you're right. So I think if you are a unionized workplace, then, most likely implementing AI in some regard, whether it's in the hiring process or part of the working process, might be something you need to, negotiate and discuss with the union, because there can be pushback at times. So I think that the Hollywood screenwriters strike that shows us some of the issues that can come up with AI, because not only are they striking for what we typically see, right, higher wages. I think another one of the big issues in that strike is the use of AI on creative projects.
That's right.
I think, right, you have the, I believe it's the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers. It's a trade organization, representing some, big entertainment companies. Their position thus far seems, that they're not willing to, address AI at this point. And, the writers, to some extent, they don't want it to replace them. It seems that, look, they might also want to be able to use AI and have permission to use it from their employers as part of the creative process. And I know from, the employers, the trade association side, there are concerns with an issue we discussed earlier, right? Copyright. If, how are credits determined if ChatGPT was used for some of the writing of a show, and can the material now be copyrighted? So, it raises, a lot of questions. And so I think unionized companies are going to have to deal with those, with the unions. And typically when you're making changes, like, implementing something like this in the workplace, it makes sense to talk to the union first before, implementing any change.
I mean, I think that's probably the biggest guidance, right? Is include your union partners. This is a tough one, because I really believe that opposing AI, opposing ChatGPT is kind of like standing in front of a tidal wave. If you are just going to stand in opposition, you're gonna get washed away. I mean, I've told my team, and I don't mean this in a threatening way at all. I mean, I love my team. Either you or your replacement will use ChatGPT, and it's not because I'm not going to fire, because I'm going to fire you. It's you can be 10 times as productive if you use it. Note I didn't say it's going to replace you. It's you or your replacement will use it, right? So I would just encourage employers, whether it's a union shop or not, have an open, honest dialogue about this. Form an AI committee. You can be a small company, have a couple of people that take the charge. How are ways that we could explore this and use this? The war for talent is very, very real. We talk about it almost every single week on this show. Nobody's looking to just get rid of a bunch of people. Every entrepreneur is looking to how do we do more, not necessarily with less, but with our same resources. How do we grow without adding expense, without adding headcount? How do I get a core team that is just friggin' awesome, that understands my company and our business and our customers deeply, and therefore knows the right questions to ask, the prompts to give, and leverage the tool to be amazing, not just how do I replace it with a stupid machine who can't do it as good as a person could have, right? What other areas do you think we should be talking about, Brian, for where places folks can get in trouble with ChatGPT or AI?
Yeah, so I think one aspect to talk about is the hiring process, right? And I think you mentioned where ChatGPT could come in, right? You're asking interview questions or other things like that, which can be helpful. But of course, if it gives you an inappropriate question to ask, right, like are they married, something like that, that would be problematic. But other types of AI have been in use in the hiring process for the last couple of years. They've been developing. Many of these are designed to filter large pools of applicants down to a smaller group that can then be reviewed by the employer. So, for instance, a computer software auto screens just like a human recruiter would, uses algorithms, other processing information to identify the best candidates, right? And so we run into that issue I addressed before, right? Is there any implicit bias in this software? It can also be used to conducting interviews, right? There's software that can record, video record someone a candidate answering questions, and it can look at their, body language, use of keywords, speed of their speech, and other predictors that, for, candidate qualifications or success. And one thing we've seen is that the first legislation we've seen in the country, they've been addressing AI in the hiring process. So right now there's Illinois was the first state to address AI in the hiring process in 2019. It took effect, I believe, in 2020, but just looking at theirs for an understanding of what these types of laws might say, it's that Illinois employers must notify applicants if AI is used to analyze a video interview they participate in. And they must then explain how the AI works and what it's evaluating, and then obtain consent from the applicant. New York City later this year will have a somewhat similar law, though this law will actually require companies to conduct bias audits to ensure that whatever screening software, AI type software they use doesn't have an impact, like a disparate impact. So I think the use in hiring can be very effective. These are tools that I think companies should explore, but at the same time, it's all about understanding what the limitations might be, where you could wind up with problems, and then addressing those with the human element, right? Because I think that's important to note. There's always a human element, even if you're relying on AI for things, and so that will, the combination of the AI and the human element, and conducting an audit, perhaps, that can put your company in the best place to use it, dare I say, carefree, right, without having the concerns that you might be going down the road toward a discrimination claim.
How about from an HR policy? What kind of policy should employers be writing and crafting and making part of, maybe it's employee orientation, maybe it's dedicated training sessions on it. handbook. Maybe speak to how employers should think from a policy perspective.
Yeah. So absolutely, companies should have policies that address AI and ChatGPT, right? Ignoring the problem doesn't make it go away. I think there's some
Right.
statistic that 43% of workers have used ChatGPT for work, and I believe it's something like 70% of those have done so without the knowledge of their employer. So, at the outset, a company needs to decide, are we adopting technology or are we saying no to it? And, your policy is going to be dictated by what level you're going to permit employees to actually use AI, because as we discussed, there are a lot of benefits to it. We don't want this to come off as we're trying to scare you away from these tools. No, they're very effective when used appropriately. So the company should take a written position, and this policy can very well go in the handbook, but it should take a position on what AI can be used and what it can be used for. That's the key, right? Identifying what AI, whether it's Chat GPT or other AI tools, are acceptable to use. And even going farther and more detailed than that, what departments, what job classifications are allowed to use it. And maybe even getting, into more detail from that, what are the allowable purposes that it can be used for? So I think a company, yep.
So if I'm an entrepreneur and I'm sitting there listening to this show, I'm on my lunch hour and maybe I'm in the car and I'm listening and I'm thinking, okay, that sounds great. But I was up till 11 o'clock last night invoicing customers after I put the kids to bed, and I left the house at 4:30 this morning to get to the job site. I'm not going to write a policy and do a training for something that's going to be changing 5 minutes from now. How should busy executives and entrepreneurs think about, this is going to change. As soon as you create a training class or publish a policy, it's going to change. So maybe just some practical guidance for how we should think about that. Because I don't think we should, I'm empathetic to that pain, but I don't think that relieves us from doing nothing. So go ahead.
Yeah. And my response to that would be, probably the most important part of any policy, and the reason you should have this is because, the policy might specify, that employees need to get permission to use AI or report its use. Because, if you don't have a policy, if you don't address this, even if it needs to be addressed every, 6 months or so, right, to be updated, you're ignoring, various things that could be tools to help your company. And if you're ignoring it, you're also ignoring the issues that could get you in trouble, right? If you have trade secrets and you're not addressing this, do employees understand they can't put a trade secret or that coding or some company information into Chat GPT, right? Without that, they might be, without a policy, they might just be putting the company's best kept secrets onto the internet, and you don't necessarily know what's going where it's going from there. So I think it's one of those things you can't ignore. And it's true, these policies will develop as the technologies change, but a lot of what the policy is about is what are the permitted uses, what are the uses we're not allowing, and just giving employees this understanding of when you use AI, you need to double check your work. When you use AI, these are the issues that could develop if you just throw anything, into the Chat GPT. So I think that you can have generalized guidance that will be applicable regardless of changes, and then the specific guidance on which tools and how we use them. Yes, that may need to be updated.
You know what? You probably, anybody watching saw me look away for a second there. I'm winging this here. I'm taking a chance on my other monitor here. I'm in ChatGPT now. I said, write an HR policy how employees should and shouldn't use ChatGPT. And in, I'll call it 3 seconds. It's way more than I can possibly read. I'll just read the first paragraph. Effective date, insert date, policy statement, : purpose of this policy is to provide guidelines for employees of the appropriate use of ChatGPT, an AI language model within the workplace. ChatGPT is a valuable tool that can enhance productivity and collaboration. However, it is important to ensure that its use aligns with the organization's values, code of conduct, and ethical standards. And then it goes on to a big old list. One thing I think it's actually decent at, and this is awesome at lots of stuff, but one of the things that's pretty good is knowing its own limitations, right? And so it simply doesn't know what it doesn't know, but it seems to acknowledge things it doesn't know. And I'm just glancing through this, I don't know, maybe it's 500 words or something. It's more than a page. It's acknowledging, hey, this doesn't usurp your, you can't work around the law. You still have to know the law. You're still responsible. And I'm paraphrasing. But here's a perfect example. If I'm that entrepreneur who was invoicing customers till 11 o'clock last night and I left at 5 o'clock this morning to go to the job site, I'm working my tail off. I don't have time. It's not that I can't write a 500-word policy, but I don't even know where to start, man, right? I mean, if I knew what to write, I could crank it out in 15 minutes, maybe 30. But it's really a 3-hour assignment because I don't even know where to start. And maybe it's going to suck, right? My advice, you go here, it literally cranked it out in about 3 seconds. Of course you should edit it. Now, an epiphany I had early on in my adoption is, instead of you editing it, say, oh, that sounds great, but bullet 4.2 change to this, and let it rewrite itself in 3 seconds instead of you taking 5 minutes. But at minimum, let it be a productivity tool for you to create a starting point. Brian, I think we've kind of bounced around a little bit here, probably more than I would have wanted to, but I think we're highlighting all kinds of great uses. Yeah. But I think we've pretty soundly hit I'm not going to even say limitations, there are some, but what the risks are and what you should and shouldn't rely on it for. Is there anything you want to say in closing here?
Yeah, so, I mean, my thought on these is similar to yours, that it's something that employers should really consider and understand what the technology is, and even just by using it and testing it out, right? To understand, like you figured out, how you can save 5 minutes of editing by asking it to clarify something. But I think really, what it comes down to is just not blindly using these things, right? Acknowledging they have these vast pros that can really help a company, but that there are limitations, there are risks, and then, putting that all together and coming up with an appropriate way that your business will use it. And, I think the key that I've mentioned a few times is that, you really, and especially when it comes to HR decisions and issues when you're using AI, is that there's got to be some human oversight to, either decisions based on AI or, oversight on, reviewing content produced by AI. But that even with that, you will likely save time by adopting it for, various uses. And if you're not, and your competitors are, right, you're at a disadvantage. And so I don't think it's something we're saying, use it. You can, have a much, trim your workforce. I don't think that's it at all. You're going to have a more efficient workforce if you have the appropriate employees using it.
I'm just thinking back. I use the metaphor. If this feels to me like we got people standing in front of a tidal wave and they're going to get washed away. I remember when Napster. I'm old enough to remember that. There was a day, for all you younglings listening, that you had to go to a music store and you would buy albums, and you couldn't buy a song. You had to buy the album. There's only one good song on the album, and you had to buy the entire album, right? And Napster comes along, and all of a sudden, file sharing, people, would buy their CD, they would rip it into this MP3 files, and now all of a sudden we're sharing all kinds of copyright laws. There's a firestorm of legal activity. kind of washed itself out, and how music is distributed was fundamentally changed, right? Now you buy either one song at a time, or more likely you subscribe to as much music as you want from, whether it's Pandora, Spotify, Apple Music, and you pay a monthly fee and listen to songs. It's the whole model changed. Music didn't go away. Artists still existed. You can't do Napster anymore and steal copyrighted material. There's licensing involved. I think we're kind of in the early days here with copywriting, and you're going to see the same thing as the AI gets more and more sophisticated around image creation. We didn't even touch on that today. My advice to small business owners and entrepreneurs, use it, man. Use it. It is an unbelievable productivity tool. But much like Napster, don't rely, you could get in real trouble for copyright infringement. And there's some people that did. Don't rely on this as the source of truth. It is not. It is smarter than your best friend. It's smarter than you, has a better memory, and it sure works a hell of a lot faster, and it doesn't take breaks. So use it, but don't bet your life on it, right? Treat it as a productivity tool, not the source of truth for all things HR. Brian, always enjoy talking to you. Everyone, thanks for joining us today. I'm sure we're going to do more on this topic as AI continues to advance. There's going to be a lot to unpack as we kind of navigate these post-Napster world of leveraging technology, leveraging artificial intelligence, machine learning in the application of the HR practices. Until next week, everybody, thank you.
At Asure, we build human capital management software and services that help 90,000 companies like yours attract, develop, and retain great people. Our low upfront costs and affordable subscription model allow you to save cash to invest in things that drive growth, not overhead. To learn more about how Asure can help you claim up to $26,000 per employee with the Employee Retention Tax Credit, automate your payroll, and build productive teams that are compliant with ever-changing HR laws, visit AsureSoftware.com.